Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to begin by hearing further evidence from Mr. Feilding-Mellen. So would you ask Mr. Feilding-Mellen to come in, please? Good morning, Mr. Feilding-Mellen.
Good morning.
All ready to keep going, I hope?
I am. I'll just
Good, yes. Take a moment to pour yourself some water. Good, all right.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Millett, when you're ready.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, good morning. Good morning, members of the panel. Good morning, Mr. Feilding-Mellen. We were talking last night about the champagne colour and a question of taste. And I'd like to continue, please, to look at the email string that passed between you and, latterly, Mr. Madison in the second half of July 2014. Can we go, please, to RBK 403508, which is a long string of emails, some of which we've already seen in a different reference yesterday afternoon. But it's more convenient to pick it up in this string because there's more at the top. Can we start at page 5, please? And at the bottom, we start with your email to Bruce Soanes, copy to Peter Madison, and you thank him for sending through the photos, which are the photos from the Picasso album he'd sent you. And we looked at this yesterday, and I'm just going back into it by way of repetition. And in the third paragraph, you tell him that you're still not 100% sure that you prefer the brushed aluminium to the battleship grey painted option, but that is very subjective, and I'm quite relaxed about the choice in the end. And you'll recall yesterday we discussed that together.
I do.
Now, we then have, above that on the page, an email from Peter Madison to you on the 18th of July, which we also looked at, where he says, he describes the feedback he's got from the planners, who weren't sure about the brushed aluminium, indicated a preference for the champagne finish and preferred the cassette fixed over the face fixing. And then he tells you about the budget. And then if we go to page 4, foot of the page, you see that you respond to Peter Madison, 18th July, and you say, so does that mean we can afford to do cassette fixings for the whole building? Is that within existing budget without having to dip into contingency? If so, we should proceed with that, as it will look better. I think we should stick with brushed aluminium or battleship grey, not champagne, but offer the planners cassette fixings. What do you think? So just pausing there, you were, it looks from this that you were offering a negotiated settlement, if I can put it that way, to the planners, or rather suggesting one that he should offer.
Yes, I was suggesting, I was asking whether he thought it would make sense, given that the planners had expressed a view that the cassette fixing will look better, and given that it was already, he had confirmed it was budgeted, I was suggesting exactly that.
Yes, yes. Then if we look above that, he comes back to you on the 21st of July, and he says, yes, we have budgeted for the cassette fixing without having to use the contingency. And then he says this, we were hoping to achieve savings by negotiating with the planners over the cladding material, aluminium instead of zinc, and fixing method, face fixing instead of cassette. To help achieve this, we were offering planners colour options to negotiate our position on the other two items. However, I'm happy to go back to planners and push our preference for the brushed aluminium / grey colour scheme. I'll keep you posted. Now, just pausing there, was this the first time that you discovered that zinc had originally been an option?
As I said in my witness statement, I actually didn't recall that particular mention of aluminium or zinc until after the fire. It wasn't something that I remember particularly noting at the time. When I read that now, and when I've read this since, to be honest, my interpretation of that sentence would actually suggest that we were hoping to achieve savings by negotiating over the cladding aluminium. So to me, that would imply that they hadn't.
Sorry.
So I don't remember at the time noting this potential difference between aluminium or zinc And actually, when I read that now, we were hoping to achieve savings by negotiating. To me, my interpretation of that sentence would be that's something which we had been hoping, but we're not necessarily doing.
What were you hoping?
It's not, well, that's what he says.
So I don't understand your answer. Let me try again. He says here that he's negotiating with the planners over the cladding material, aluminium instead of zinc.
Well, what he says...
Well, hold on, I've got a question that's going to come. My question is, when he said aluminium instead of zinc, to the best of your recollection, was that the first occasion on which you had been told that zinc had been a choice?
I don't remember whether I had previously been told that zinc or aluminium were a choice.
Right, thank you. Did you ask anybody on the project at any time what were the advantages, or whether there were any advantages of aluminium as against zinc?
I don't remember asking that because it was just not an area of, it was not something which I knew much about. Aluminium and zinc, as far as I know, are two different metals. I didn't know about the different potential properties of those two metals, and it wasn't a question that would have sprung to mind.
And we know that you didn't ask Mr. Madison or Mr. Soames which of those two choices would be safer. Is that because, as you've just said, you didn't know about the difference of the potential properties of those two metals?
As I think we got into yesterday, the reason that we were having this conversation was all to do with a ongoing dispute with planners. Planners were concerned with the appearance and use of buildings. I was aware that building control was a different function, a different group of officers, which were more concerned with technical health and safety issues to do with the building. And so this particular conversation was talking about matters relating to appearance, which the planners were dealing with.
So I think the answer to my question is no. Is that right?
No, I did not ask in this conversation about whether aluminium or zinc would be safer.
Did you inquire whether the choice between zinc and aluminium had ever been put to the residents as part of a consultation exercise?
As I think I've said, I did not at the time note this choice between aluminium and zinc, and I did not, as far as I recall, ask any questions about it.
Can we then look up in the email chain to Peter Madison's response to you? And he says this is bottom of page 3. And he says, "Dear Councillor Feilding-Mellen, we've received some feedback from planners via our planning consultants. The key points are, first bullet, no exposed fixings. Second bullet, champagne colour. Third bullet, not convinced by brushed aluminium, a point I will be discussing further. We are asking for clarify," he says, "on how receptive they are to consider the alternative colour schemes that we have stated as our preference." And he says, "I'm on leave until Monday," and he puts you in touch with David Gibson. You see that?
Yes.
You respond the next day, the 25th of July, to Peter Madison, copy to Peter Gibson, and you say this: "I don't actually even remember the champagne colour exactly. It certainly wasn't one that any of us seemed to like much, but how bad is it? And is that really the planner's decision? What does Bruce think? If they really don't want the brushed aluminium, would he prefer the champagne or battleship grey? What do they think about exposed fixing above fourth floor, RFM?" And I'll just go through the rest of this quickly with you. Mr. Madison comes back to you on page 2 at the foot of that page. And he says, "Dear Councillor Feilding-Mellen, it's not strictly the planner's decision. However, we do have to get their permission to proceed. Failure to do so could result in delay and additional cost. So we work with the planners to try and reach a consensus. Bruce has developed a palette of colour options, all of which he thinks would be appropriate for the design. Planners have asked him to produce a worked-up drawing of the detail of the champagne option, I'll ask him to send you a copy and we would welcome your views. Planner preference is for cassette fixing throughout. We will continue to push to see if they will move on this above the 4th floor. And then over the page, you don't need to see it, it says regards Peter. Well, there you have it, top of page 3. So that's his response to you. Sorry, your response. His response to you. And then you respond to. If you go to page 2, David Gibson writes to you on the 29th of July and says this: further to Peter's email, please find attached a series of images from Studio E for the champagne option. It would be useful to have your views on this. The feedback we're currently getting from planners indicates they will not accept the face-fixing options on the higher floors. I've attached an email from our planning consultant on this issue for your information. And you then respond to that, foot of page 1 over to page 2, on the 29th of July, to David Gibson, copy to Peter Madison, and you say this: thanks, I understand that we do have the budget to do cassette fixings all the way up. Therefore, I actually agree that we may as well do it all the way, as it will look better in the long run. And then over the top of page 2, you say this: I'm less convinced by the champagne colour. I know it's hard to tell in a drawing like that, but none of us chose that option as the best when on site. Also, I really don't like the lime green and champagne combination at the ground floor. The lime green should be less neon and more a pastel shade of green, stroke turquoise, or a deeper, stroke darker British racing green. And I'd personally prefer the battleship grey, but what does everyone else think? Could we get an architect to do same drawings showing that option so we can compare? Just pausing there, would you accept just from that you are delving into some pretty specific details on pretty aesthetic matters?
Yes.
Yes. How did you think that expression of private opinion would assist arriving at a negotiated settlement with the planners in order to speed the project up?
As I said yesterday, we had got into a discussion about colour schemes, which was one of the issues that the planners were using as to hold up the scheme. Because we had got into that discussion, I was thinking about colours, and I decided, obviously, to give my personal subjective opinion. As I said yesterday, thinking that my personal subjective opinion was as valid as anyone else's. Again, as I said yesterday, I personally didn't like the principle that a single junior planning officer could, determine the colour based on her preference by threatening to hold up the whole scheme. And I was involved for that reason. And
what? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I almost cut across you.
No, go on.
Yes. I mean, why was your expression of your own personal interests, lime green, turquoise, British racing green, any more likely to exert authority which would unblock the block?
Can you go up a page, please? Can I see what time and date this was, and then go up it, see the rest of the chain above it?
Oh, we will. We're going to look at that. I'm just pausing.
Can I look at that now before I answer?
No, of course you can. At the moment, just to be clear, we're at the foot of page 1, and we're on your email of the 29th of July 2014, 1307.
Okay.
And the response to that, do you want to see that? We're going to look at that, but we can do that.
Can we just go up again, please? So up to so I can see the date and time above where I say most important thing is to get cracking.
We'll come to that.
So
by all means.
Is 1:40. And when did I send the email below, which you're focusing on? At 1:07. So within 33 minutes, I had the same thought that you are having now, which is my personal preferences about British racing green or this green are not what matters. What matters is to get cracking.
Yes. Well, let's fine. We'll come to that perhaps perhaps a little bit more gradually, if we can.
Okay.
Let's look at the next email intervening. There's an email from David Gibson to you at 1326. Thanks for the quick response. I've already asked Bruce from Studio E to forward some graphics indicating the brushed aluminium/grey combination and will forward to you on receipt. I will feed back your comments on the colour combinations and ask Bruce if he can do some variations on this. There are mixed views on the colours, but the champagne seems to be viewed as a safer stroke less bold option. However, the planners appear not to like the aluminium/grey combination. And then you respond, as you've rightly pointed out, 14 minutes later, 1340. Okay, in that case, I'll be flexible about the champagne. Another example of designing by committee. Most important thing is to get cracking. When you said another example of designing by committee in response to Mr. Gibson's email that I've just shown you, what did you mean?
I think I was referring to the fact that, as I've said before, my understanding was that when the architect, the TMO, and I met on site, champagne was not the colour which any of the people leading the project preferred, but designing by committee is I think, a fairly well-known phrase to express a view that it's a bit like saying too many chefs in the kitchen.
Right. Were you one of them?
I was trying not to be. I was trying to say, fine, I'll be flexible, let's just get cracking.
Yes. Do you accept from this email run that I've now shown you in its entirety, I hope in its entirety, that you became closely involved in matters of personal subjective opinion about the colour?
I think I've said in my statement that I got involved and expressed my personal subjective view about the colours. I've also tried making clear that the reason that I was having this conversation was to try and help resolve the blockage in the planning system.
And at no time during this discussion, just to be clear about the facts, did it occur to you to raise any questions about fire safety, particularly the fire safety of these panels, the colour of which you're discussing?
It did not, for the reason which I have given before, which was this was a planning-related matter, which was dealing with the appearance and aesthetic questions.
Yes. Now, let's go then to something else that's happening at the same time. Can we please go to your first witness statement at page 22? And at paragraph 76 on that page, you say this. Then on 17th July 2014, I was forwarded an email from Laura Johnson along with Councillor Marshall, and then you exhibit it. It was reassurance from Laura Johnson that the Council and the TMO were aware of the advice coming from the LFB following the Lacknell House fire, and we were reassured the TMO were on top of it. In her email, Laura Johnson explained that she was forwarding documents that the fire brigade had produced, along with the accompanying email. Laura Johnson says, I hope we have provided Scrutiny Committee with sufficient information on fire safety and the measures that the Council and TMO are taking to ensure the health and safety of the Council tenants and leaseholders. But if, as a result of reading the information attached, you would like any further update, please let me know, and we can provide a further update. And then you say, I do not recall having any further questions at that time. Now, the email itself, let's just have it up. It's at RBK 403314. It's your RFM 44. And you can see that it is indeed from Laura Johnson on the 17th of July 2014 to you and Councillor Marshall, and its subject matter is 2 new guides for councillors about fire safety and know the plan. And Laura Johnson says what you have accurately transliterated into your statement. Now, there are attachments to this email, and indeed, as Laura Johnson says, she says the fire brigade have produced these 2 documents. Can I just put them up for you? We'll first of all have LFB 401294. This is a document produced by the LFB entitled Councillor Guide on Fire Safety for Use During Estate Visits. The second one, and I'll just show you this, perhaps we can have it side by side, is LFB 401295. One is blue, one is red. This one is entitled Councillor Guide on Fire Safety for Use During Council Meetings. They both have the distinct tower block in the shape of a question mark, as you can see there. When you received this email from Laura Johnson on the 17th of July 2014, did you open the attachments?
I cannot remember specifically when I did. I do remember having seen these and skimming them, but I can't remember exactly when I would have opened them and looked at them.
Can you think of any reason why, when you received that email from Laura Johnson, you wouldn't have opened the attachments and read them?
Nope.
No. Did you forward these on to any other councillors, do you think?
I don't remember doing so.
Now, at this time, you were still in communication, as we've seen, with Peter Maddison. I say still, you were in the middle of the communication about colours of cladding and the aesthetics, and with the planning department. Did the receipt of these guides lead you to consider the safety of the cladding that was then under discussion for Grenfell Tower?
It did not.
And why is that?
I cannot remember why that would have been. Again, from looking at these documents, for example, risk assessments, I was aware from the regular annual reviews and the updates that I received that the TMO did have a process in place for fire risk assessments, for following up the actions and doing it in best practice with the LFB. As I've said in my witness statement, I, over the years, got what I believed to be was sufficient reassurance from the TMO and from housing officers that the risks, as highlighted in these documents, were being managed by the TMO.
Laura Johnson thought it appropriate to send these to you on that day, 17th of July 2014. Do you understand, or have you any understanding of why she might have sent them to you particularly?
Well, I think because she sent them to Councillor Marshall and to myself,
yes.
I would imagine that's because he was chairman of the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee, and I was cabinet member for housing.
Yes.
And as she says in her email, she makes the point that she hopes that the Housing Department have already provided Scrutiny Committee with reassurance that
yes.
things are being done well, which I believed at the time to have been the case.
So we can take it, can we, that as far as you were concerned, she was expecting you to open the attachments and familiarise yourself with the contents?
I think from my interpretation of her email, she was saying, here is information which you might well find useful that has been prepared by the LFB for councillors in positions such as the ones you hold. And she goes on to say it is her opinion that, she believes that the council/councillors have been given reassurance that that is all in hand.
Yes. I mean, these are new documents. These aren't repeats of documents you'd seen before.
Not that I remember, no.
And were you aware of, at the time, of a fire in South London which had happened in July 2009 at Lakenal House in Southwark?
Yes, I think I had heard of it.
Yes. And had you read the coroner's recommendations, do you think, at any stage before July 2014?
Not that I remember.
Do you remember anybody talking at the meetings you went to about housing, about the Lakenal House coroner's recommendations?
I seem to remember getting, I think there was an email again, which Laura Johnson forwarded to me, which maybe she had received from Janice Ray, talking about the findings. I think.
So that would have been, I think, in June 2013. Does that date ring a bell with you?
I'm afraid I just can't remember the date.
Very well.
But
Now, you didn't make the connection, I think, between the contents of this document and the discussion that you were having with Jonathan Bohr and Peter Madison and David Gibson about the panels.
that's right. That's fair.
And the reason you give, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm summarising the evidence you gave a moment ago, was because you'd never had any reason to think that there was anything wrong with either the fire risk assessments being done by the fire risk assessor or the actions being taken by the TMO to close those out.
That's correct.
Right. But of course, this is not about historic fire risk assessments or the actions by the TMO to close those out. This is about the refurbishment. When I say this, I mean your study of the panels was about the refurbishment. Did you not look to see whether there was anything in these documents which covered what you should do as a councillor in respect of fire safety, where one of the buildings in your stock, or your TMO stock, was being refurbished?
No, I failed to do that, and based on what I know has happened, I regret having failed to do that. I, at the time, was conscious that there were many layers of people with what I thought was the relevant expertise and indeed the role to check the health and safety generally, including fire safety aspects of a refurbishment project like this.
Let's then look into LFB 401924, the blue one. If we could just have that up on the screen. 1924 blue. We can see that it's entitled Councillor Guide on Fire Safety for Use During Estate Visits. And you can see if we turn the page that it acts as a prompt for various questions, as you can see. And on the top left-hand corner, you can see 5 lines down, it says, you can ask, and this is during estate visits, what emergency evacuation plan is in place for this building? How have residents been informed about it? Are fire escapes and other parts of the escape route, such as corridors and stairwells, checked regularly for obstructions? Is emergency lighting and signage in place along the escape route? Did you notice when you got this document that those were questions that you should ask or councillors should ask when visiting properties in TMO stock?
I can't remember at the time. I see now it says you can ask all these questions. Some of these questions, as I say, I knew were issues and questions that we were regularly updated on. For example, we were also told that the TMO were arranging home safety visits, I think they were called, with the LFB in high-rise blocks. I remember there were issues around people storing mobility scooters at certain times. So I was aware that these were the sorts of questions which were being reported either to me or to scrutiny committee, and we were being reassured that these sorts of issues and questions were being looked into and handled. I cannot say that I did go and ask every single one of these questions every time I went to one of the housing estates which I visited during my time as cabinet member for housing.
Looking at page 1, it says on the right-hand side, under the heading "Confirming the emergency evacuation plan is in place," It says purpose-built blocks of flats or maisonettes are designed and built as self-contained residential units, usually sharing common corridors, staircases and an entrance. They can be of any height, not just high-rise. In purpose-built blocks of flats and maisonettes, the stay-put principle applies. This means that if a fire starts in the common parts or in another flat, all residents not directly affected by the fire would be expected to stay put and remain in their flat unless directed to leave by the fire and rescue service. And then it says this: there should also be an emergency evacuation plan, in bold, in place for each building. This details the action that residents and others need to take if there is a fire. This plan must make sure residents and others are safe, that a fire can be detected, and that residents are warned of this event. Residents should be able to safely escape from a fire using routes within the building designed and maintained, if we go over the page, to be safe to use during an emergency. And then it goes on, there should be appropriate signposting and lighting in place on these routes. There is a responsibility to inform tenants about the evacuation measures and safe behaviours for properties. And then there are the questions I've just asked you. Did you take any steps at any stage to satisfy yourself as councillor, having been guided to do so by the LFB, that there was an emergency evacuation plan in place for all the buildings in the TMO stock?
I do not remember doing so, and as I've just said, based on what I know now, I very much wish that I had done. I think at the time I took the view that given this was a document prepared by the LFB, and given that I was frequently told that the TMO had bi-monthly meetings with the LFB, and that the LFB were visiting its high-rise blocks, and specifically working with the TMO on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment, I made the assumption that if the LFB were telling councillors that we can ask this, that they would be doing that themselves at these bi-monthly meetings, but that was an assumption I probably should not have made.
Yes, I understand. You were deputy leader at this stage, weren't you?
Yes.
This was July 2014. Did you, or do you remember, did anybody within RBKC, as councillors, think to themselves that there ought to be an effort just to double check that the guidance being given here by the LFB to councillors was carried through, so that the TMO was reminded of what it was they had to do?
Sorry, your question was, did I as deputy leader do that?
Did you, as deputy leader, or anybody else in RBKC, ever think that there should be an effort just to double check that the TMO was doing what it was supposed to do, vis-a-vis ensuring that there was an emergency evacuation plan as described in this document?
I didn't. As I've said, I wish I had. I took comfort from the email that I got from Laura Johnson, who forwarded me this guide, which said she hoped that we could get reassurance that these things were being done. And I got reassurance from the many reports that I've already referred to. But I or another councillor could have asked these questions ourselves.
And indeed, the time and opportunity to ask these questions would or could have been during your dialogue with Peter Madison over the colour of the cladding panels.
It would or could have been at any number of occasions when I visited council estates.
Can we look at the red document, LFB 401295, please, at page 1 to start with. There it is again. And it sets out the provisions of the RRO under the heading Local Authorities as the responsible person. And in the right-hand column, second paragraph, refers to the stay put principle, which we've already covered. But if we go, please, to the next page, we can see in the heading, what can councillors do Do not make assumptions, it says. Do not make assumptions that fire safety is being actively or effectively managed in purpose-built blocks of flats and maisonettes in your borough. Councillors can make their boroughs safer by scrutinising how responsibilities for fire safety are met and ensuring that the fire safety in your borough is continuously being monitored and improved. Just pausing there, on what you've told us this morning, Mr. Feilding-Mellen, you were making exactly the assumption that this document advised you should not make.
That appears to be the case.
Yes. And then it goes on in the next box, strategic and policy questions for councillors to ask. There are questions you should ask about the fire safety of purpose-built blocks of flats and maisonettes in your borough, particularly in relation to the residential estates and properties run by the local authority, ALMO or local housing associations. They can be asked generally or in the context of specific programmes and projects. And then underneath that, you'll see, if we just scroll up a little bit, please, a number, 7, I think, in all, of questions that councillors should be asking, particularly in the context of specific programmes and projects. And if you just cast your eye down those, you can see, for example, the fourth bullet point. The third is about contractual relationships. The fourth is about, is there a clear process in place for residents to report and escalate concerns about fire safety, etc. And then the last bullet point, specifically, I'll show you, it says this. Does the borough have clear policies stating that, first sub-bullet, before any modifications or maintenance works are carried out in purpose-built blocks of flats or maisonettes, there must be a proper assessment of the impact on fire safety. Second sub-bullet, all modifications or maintenance works will result in buildings which are equally or more fire safety compliant than they were before the works. Third sub-bullet, once modifications or maintenance works are complete, councillors will receive confirmation that the building will meet all necessary fire safety requirements. First, my first question to you on this page is, did you ever ask any of these questions identified here?
Well, I think councillors, I was present when these sorts of questions were indeed discussed by councillors, such as the fire risk assessments, such as enforcement action taken by the London Fire Brigade, which we were told about at Adair Tower, such as the issues around front doors and leaseholder responsibility, a clear process in place for residents' complaints and the complaints process, and the fact that they could write to us or come and present to the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee or write petitions. The fifth point, I don't remember being asked about. What's in place to make sure residents know what they need to do? I was told that there were, as I say, these home safety visits by the LFB. And we, as councillors, I do remember being told that there was, I think that there was fire risk assessment done as part of the refurbishment. And we were aware that there was building control who had the job of checking these sorts of projects. Looking at the last bullet point, does the borough have clear policies stating that? And I've read you the 3 bullet points. Did you ask that question at any stage? I do not remember specifically asking that question. No. Let's continue then on the topic of fire safety. When you were first appointed as cabinet member with responsibility for housing, property and regeneration in May 2013, what efforts did you yourself make to acquaint yourself with the programme of fire risk assessments which had been carried out by the TMO to date? What do you mean exactly? Did you that I was going to go and have a look at the entire list of fire risk assessments across the HRA and look at the outstanding actions? I did not do that. Well, what did you do? My question was, what efforts did you make? I received updates and was generally satisfied by the reassurance given in those. You received updates. In what form did you receive those updates? primarily in those annual and mid-year reviews that went to myself and to Scrutiny Committee. And I think there were also interim emails and updates that were given to me either at policy boards or emails forwarded to me by housing officers.
Did you ever ask any question of the TMO or the housing department, principally Laura Johnson, about the progress being made in relation to fire risk assessments and closing out outstanding items?
No, it was not an area that I had any particular knowledge of, and I took what I was told on trust.
So you received information in the form of the annual and mid-year reviews and in certain emails, but is this right? You never
About the information that I remember receiving about fire risk assessments was, on the whole, reassuring to me. I do not remember receiving information that gave me at that time cause for concern. And as we discussed yesterday, the fact that it was all coming through reports that had been prepared by the housing department, I took extra comfort from that fact that professional housing managers were comfortable to report those reassurances to councillors.
Were you aware of a backlog of repairs by the TMO?
Repairs generally. I was aware that there was. I mean, I think as long as I was a councillor, it was the case that the HRA did not have sufficient funds to meet the investment requirements across the whole HRA. That was reported quite regularly in HRA business plans and before.
Were you aware of a backlog of repairs by the TMO responsive to FRA outstanding items?
I was not.
Were you aware that RBKC had no fire safety KPIs for monitoring the TMO in that sphere?
I have now looked, and I have to say I didn't notice that at the time, and I think the reason I didn't was because it was a standing item on those annual reviews. There was always a health and safety and fire safety item.
But not a KPI?
Not a KPI as far as I remember.
No. Were you aware of how it was that the TMO collected and stored information on vulnerable residents in its stock?
Not in any detail. I was aware that they did, as was reported in those reports, make special effort with the LFB to review the fire safety in the sheltered housing accommodation, which is where I believed most of our most vulnerable residents resided.
You say not in any detail, leaving aside the sheltered housing accommodation. Were you aware in any detail at all, or even in outline, how it was that the TMO collected and stored its information on vulnerable residents?
No.
Were you aware that the TMO had not produced personal emergency evacuation plans in respect of any resident of Grenfell Tower, as at the date of the fire?
I was not aware.
Throughout your time in your position as a deputy leader and cabinet member for housing, property and regeneration, did you ever make any inquiries yourself into whether actions from fire risk assessments were being completed in a timely manner?
Not that I recall specifically. As I say, I think I took comfort from the fairly regular updates which said that they were strengthening and improving that process.
Do you remember any occasion, in respect of the matters we've just covered, when you took an annual or mid-year review and asked and interrogated it with Laura Johnson or anybody else within the RBKC Housing Department or Housing Commissioning?
I do remember occasions at Policy Board where, and again, I relied more on the housing officers to do this because they were more familiar with best practice. And I do recall there being occasions in Policy Board where Laura Johnson, as the Director of Housing, would pick up on areas of performance that she thought were less than satisfactory and seek reassurances from the TMO at those meetings about what would be done.
Right. So is this right in a nutshell? Laura Johnson would do the scrutinising, as it were, as far as you were concerned, and you would trust her and rely on what she was telling you?
If I did trust and rely on the judgment of the housing department, I would also ask questions if I felt there was something that didn't make sense or I wasn't happy with.
Is there anything that comes to mind now? I know it's difficult looking back at all those years ago. Is there anything that comes to mind now in respect of which, having been told something by Laura Johnson, there was something you weren't happy with or didn't make sense?
I think there are quite a lot of occasions where the first response that I got from Laura Johnson, I went back and challenged and asked, and indeed there are a few examples of me doing just that in my witness statement and attachments, and there would have been many more across my work over the 4 years.
I want to ask you now about a specific issue concerning non-compliant leaseholder front doors. You mentioned this in your first witness statement, briefly, I think, at paragraph 70. We can just have that in front of you, please, page 19, where you are summarising a report for the HPSC on or dated the 10th of July 2014. And as you can see there, you refer to the report. The report itself is actually RFM 40 that you exhibit to paragraph 69. If you look just above that, please, on the screen, can we scroll up to paragraph 69? We can see you say, this is a report on the TMO's Performance Review 2013 to 14 and the TMO's Performance Agreement 2014 to 15. So that's what you're talking about. And if we go back into paragraph 70, 4 lines in, you say this: the report stated that the programme to replace non-fire rated tenants' flat entrance doors has been successfully concluded. The report is very detailed in relation to health and safety and specifically fire safety. Further issues noted include that the TMO has worked with the Council's legal services to address the issues associated with non-compliant leaseholder flat entrance doors, and that the TMO meets with the LFB on a bi-monthly basis to discuss fire safety issues and reduce the likelihood and severity of any fires that occur. Do you recall the issue of remedying non-compliant leaseholder doors?
I remember that issue being something which was discussed quite a few times at the scrutiny committee.
Did you have any role in relation to dealing with the LFB?
No.
Do you agree that the report quoted in your witness statement made clear the risk posed by non-compliant leaseholder front doors?
Yes.
Did you take any action as a result?
Well, I knew that the council and the TMO was taking action to try and make sure that we received regular updates, not just in these, but in the Director of Housing's live issues reports that went to scrutiny, which showed the progress that was being made in working with leaseholders with non-compliant doors. And I think finally it got down to there were only 2 left, and there was a lot of work going on in trying to persuade or indeed enforce those leaseholders to do that. There was also, I remember being told, disagreement between the council and the LFB about who could or should take that enforcement action against non-compliant leaseholders. But there is a report somewhere that I saw where the council says, despite this disagreement, it has decided to do this work because of the need to prioritise the health and safety of our residents.
Can we look, please, at RBK 30544431? This is Councillor Marshall's second witness statement to the inquiry at page 3, please. And I'd like to look at paragraph 7. And in the third sentence, he says this: the committee's function, if we can just look at the third sentence, 4th line, the committee's function was to scrutinise the actions of the executive. The committee had to start from an assumption that the TMO, monitored by council officers and the LFB, would always follow best practice in relation to safety. Health and safety was a specific item on the TMO performance review shared with the committee annually. This was a key mechanism for us to gain comfort on this issue. When a specific fire safety issue was raised at the committee, namely the safety of leaseholder doors, we followed this up repeatedly with questions until we were satisfied with the outcome. Between 2012 and May 2016, when I left the HPSC, As far as I can recall, the issue of leaseholder doors was raised at least 9 times at HPSC meetings. It is important to note the committee had no power to direct any action either to council officers or the TMO. Its powers were limited to questioning and publicising the matters before it. Do you agree with Councillor Marshall there that that was the approach, as he's said, adopted by the HPSC during those dates?
Yes.
Yeah. And do you recall the issue of leaseholder doors arising at least 9 times? Is that about right?
Yeah, I don't remember the number of times, but if he has counted, I'm sure he's correct.
Can we go to RBK 3032449, please? This is an example of how RBKC treated the leaseholder door issue. It's Laura Johnson's report to the HPSC of the 16th of July 2013 on the TMO's performance for 2012 to 13 and performance agreement for the next year. Can we go to page 11 in that, please, in paragraph 8.2? She says there, and this is under the rubric health and safety at the top of your screen, she says, responsibility for enforcement of non-compliant leaseholder flat entrance doors remained unresolved following discussions with London Fire Brigade, LFB senior managers, and so RBKC were guided by Council's opinion to seek a definitive response from the Department for Communities and Local Government, DCLG. To date, an initial response has been received from DCLG which indicates that enforcement should be via the Housing Act and not the Regulatory Reform Order. Now, just pausing there, you were, I think, by this time in post as Cabinet Member responsible for property, housing and regeneration.
Yes.
Yes. Were you involved at all in seeking Council's opinion on this issue?
I wouldn't have been the person who sought Council's opinion.
You wouldn't have been. What about in seeking the advice of DCLG?
Again, that would have been officers who did that.
I see. So when she says RBKC were guided by Council's opinion to seek a definitive response, that wouldn't be you, that would be officers, would it?
Yes.
Yes. Now, the issue, the debate, if you like, that Laura Johnson addressed in this report was who should enforce non-compliant leaseholder doors. Should it be the LFB as the enforcement body under the RRO, or should it be the Council under the Housing Act? Is that how you understood the debate?
I remember being told that there was that debate, disagreement, discussion.
And do you remember RBKC actually seeking guidance from the DCLG over that?
I remember what has been told here. I don't remember more than that.
Do you remember, can you help me, that the response, or certainly the initial response, was that enforcement should be by RBKC under the Housing Act? Do you remember that?
That's what it says.
Yes. Is it right that, in fact, RBKC did not enforce under the Housing Act?
I don't think that is right. From what I recall, RBKC did then go about enforcing this.
How did it do that? Do you remember?
There are lots of reports which provide updates about this over the next, whatever it is, 2 years or so. And I think they did it through a combination of the legal department writing letters, the TMO writing to people, using, I think there were talks about the TMO's fire risk assessment. I can't remember exactly, but it's set out in reports, and I have seen them and read them.
Well, the TMO wouldn't be the body to enforce under the Housing Act, would it? It would be the Council. So I'm just wondering why.
It's not. I'm afraid it's just not an area where I have expertise. That what the Council did go about doing is reported in the many reports that went to Housing Property Scrutiny Committee, and it might have been reported in some minutes of my Housing Policy Board as well.
Right. See, you've disagreed with the proposition I was putting to you that RBKC did not enforce under the Housing Act, and I was just interested to know.
I don't know what you mean. The RBKC didn't leave it to the LFB. It set about working with, I think there was something like 107 potentially non-compliant leaseholder doors at the beginning of the process. And it went about working with those leaseholders And as I say, what I remember is the final report said there were 2 that they were still working with, and they were in the process of trying to resolve those final 2. So I don't know whether they ended up having to take enforcement action, but they were going about doing the work to ensure those non-compliant doors were made compliant.
Right. So my question was about enforcement under the Housing Act. And I was suggesting to you that RBKC did not use their enforcement powers under the Housing Act. I thought you were disagreeing with me. And on that basis,
well, I was trying to make the point, and I'm sorry if I misunderstood your question. I was trying to make the point that RBKC did not leave it to the LFB, despite its view that it was more of an LFB's responsibility. After this advice, my understanding is that RBKC set about working to ensure those leaseholders' doors were made compliant.
Well, okay. Did you understand that, in fact, the LFB was the enforcing authority under the RRO, but RBKC was the enforcing authority under the Housing Act?
I only knew that from what was written here. I did not understand the detailed statutory differences between that. That was we relied on officers in both the housing and in the legal department to make sure the correct thing was being done in those cases.
In your time as deputy leader and cabinet member responsible for housing, property and regeneration, did you ever have occasion to consider RBKC's own fire safety policy?
I don't remember doing so.
Well, let's have a look at it then to see if we can prompt your memory. RBK 401655, please. Now, this policy is dated January 2014. It's quite a striking first page. It's called By Borough Corporate Health and Safety, and there's a ring of words around it. And then underneath it, it says the same thing, and you can see that it's for both Hammersmith and Fulham and RBKC. Just looking at that first page, is that something you think you've ever seen before?
I don't remember seeing it before.
I mean, you would remember it, I think, if you'd seen it before.
Well, anyway, I don't remember seeing it before.
Right. You don't then. Can you help me then whether there was a policy which preceded this one?
I cannot.
No. Do you know whose role it was within RBKC to take responsibility for ensuring that this policy was carried into effect?
Ultimately, I would have thought it was the chief executive and town clerk's responsibility.
Right. So during your time, Mr. Holgate?
Yes.
Yes. Let me just see if I can be a bit more specific, because I'm conscious that I'm asking you a specific question on the front page of this. Can we look at page 2 of this document and look at the last paragraph on that page, at the very foot of your screen? And it says, this policy sets out the strategy and organisational arrangements for the management of fire safety within the council. It is important that we all adhere to it and remember that the most powerful message we can send is through our own visible behaviour as an example. Do you remember ever being told that, even if you hadn't seen that part of this document, or this document at all?
No, I don't.
Can we look at page 3, please, first paragraph under the introduction? This policy sets out the strategic fire safety vision and objectives of elected members and the executive joint management team. It describes the way in which we effectively manage fire safety based upon British Standard Publication PAS 7, Fire Risk Management System Specification. And then there's a diagram, I suppose, act, plan, do, check, if that's the right order. Plan, do, check, act, I think is what you see underneath that. And then underneath that it says, this policy must be brought to the attention of all employees so that they are encouraged to cooperate and communicate any necessary information on fire safety matters throughout the organisation in order to discharge their duties. Can I assume that you have never seen this page of this document?
I don't remember ever seeing this document. I think Were members involved? This is the sort of thing which would have gone to the Cabinet and Corporate Services Scrutiny Committee, and I suspect if there was a Cabinet member who signed it off, it would have been the Cabinet member for Civil Society.
Right. You see, it seems, am I right in thinking that under the introduction it contemplates that all the elected members, as well as the Executive Joint Management Team, would be aware of this document?
The sentence which you read, which I can't see now. But,
no, you can't. I'm so sorry. You're absolutely right. Can we scroll up to the top of the page? Yes, I'm sorry. Introduction.
It does give that impression, I would agree.
Well, it says it.
It doesn't say all, but yes, elected members.
Right. Can you explain why this document never came to your attention? You were Deputy Leader as well as Cabinet Member for Property.
I cannot explain.
So I'm just looking to see whether or not it's worth my while asking you any questions about this document at all, if you had never seen it.
I won't be able to tell you very much, I'm afraid.
Perhaps I'll consider that over the impending break and come back to you about it. But let's move on then to another document. Can we please look at RBK 30298084? We can see this is a report produced by Laura Johnson for a meeting of the HPSC on the 13th of May 2015, as you can see. It's called Live Issues Report by the Director of Housing. And if we go down to paragraph 1.2, this is under the heading Leaseholder Doors. It says, in March 2014, we reported that we'd been working with householders of 37 doors that had been assessed as non-compliant. This had gone down from a high of 107 doors in December 2013. 35 of these households have now provided evidence of their doors being compliant. This leaves 2 households with non-compliant doors. I show you that because I think you referred to that a few moments ago in your evidence about leaseholder doors. Is that what you were thinking of?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Now, if we go then to paragraph 1.5 at the foot of the page, it says, under the heading Ongoing Work to Identify and Change Non-Compliant Doors, KCTMA's programme of fire risk assessments, FRA, is ongoing and continues to consider the compliance of flat entrance doors as they form an integral part of the means of escape from the block. The FRA highlights any flat doors which are potentially non-compliant. Were you concerned well, first of all, did you receive this report? I should have asked you that question.
I can't remember exactly whether I was at this Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee, but I think I would have received it in advance, even if I hadn't attended.
Were you concerned that despite the flat door replacement programme, there may still have been non-compliant doors?
I took that paragraph to be one of reassurance, which is that, I think the point is that leaseholders can and sometimes did change their front doors. They didn't need to ask the council to do it. They could do it, that's their own property. And so I took this as reassurance that it was an ongoing process of the FRA's checking and identifying doors which might have become non-compliant.
Were you concerned that there were still non-compliant doors, notwithstanding the programme?
The 2 non-compliant doors that were highlighted in the above paragraph.
Well, I'm looking at the paragraph. I've read it to you.
Paragraph
1.5.
1.5.
It's not just referring to the leaseholders, it's referring to all doors, all flat entrance doors.
Can we go up and I'll read it again?
Yes, of course. Paragraph 1.5 at the foot of page 1. I'll read it to you again. KCTMA's programme of fire risk assessments, FRA, is ongoing and continues to consider the compliance of flat entrance doors as they form an integral part of the means of escape from the block. The FRA highlights any flat doors which are potentially non-compliant.
So my reading of that now, and I imagine my reading of that then, is not saying that there are more non-compliant doors. It's saying that the TMO has a process in place to continue an ongoing review to make sure that if there are doors that for some reason or other become non-compliant, they will be identified and then rectified. That's what I read that paragraph to mean.
Yeah, but it's telling you that there are non-compliant doors. My question is...
I don't think it is.
It's telling you there may become non-compliant doors in the future. Well, there may be
Well,
not.
that's what it's saying is the FRA highlights any flat doors which are potentially non-compliant.
Yes, but it doesn't say... Anyway, as I've said, my reading of that paragraph is not your reading of that paragraph.
All right. Let's then look at the minutes of the meeting. RBK 3032444. We can see from the first page, if we go to that you were there. See that?
I see it.
You were in attendance, as well as Laura Johnson. If we go, please, to page 2, we can see under paragraph A5, live issues report by the Director of Housing. And we've seen the report, and what she says is, in the second paragraph, in response to Councillor Bakhtiar, Ms Johnson advised that the TMO tenant doors were checked for fire safety compliance as part of an annual programme and replaced if non-compliant. She agreed to provide an update to the committee on the exact number of non-compliant TMO tenant doors. Now, we can see you were at this meeting, and we can see that Councillor Bakhtiar had picked up on the point about non-compliant tenant doors, and we can see, as I've just shown you, that Laura Johnson agreed to provide an update to the committee on the number, the exact number of non-compliant doors. At that stage, would you agree, from what you could see at the meeting, that the number of non-compliant TMO tenant doors was of concern to the committee?
I think the committee was doing its job well and asking questions which were relevant about the fire safety and seeking reassurance. And again, to me, that is reassuring. It is saying that the TMO does go and check on an ongoing basis and will replace them if found to be non-compliant.
Yes. And my question, coming back to it again, is, were you concerned, being at the meeting and seeing the exchange, that there were non-compliant doors?
The impression that I had got over the years was that this issue of doors, there were various things that could be done to a door to make them non-compliant, sometimes by the tenant, sometimes by the leaseholder. And so it was reassuring to know that rather than just doing it once, there was an ongoing mechanism in place to check this and correct it as and when a non-compliant door was identified.
Right. I'd like to ask you some questions now, please, about the Adair and Trellick Tower fires. And, Mr. Chairman, I can get some way into this topic before an appropriate time for a break, so I'd like to do that if I can.
Yes, of course.
It's a bit early to stop. Now, you'll recall, I think, because you cover it in your first witness statement, that there was a fire in Adair Tower in October 2015, yes?
Yes.
And you cover that, just for our note, as well as your recollection, paragraphs 34 to 35 on page 8, and you cover the Trellick Tower fire at paragraphs 36 to 40 on page 9 of your statement. Let's go to paragraph 34 of your statement on page 8 specifically. You say there, is your first witness statement, you say there that on the 30th of November 2015, I was copied into an email from Councillor Paget-Brown to himself entitled Notes for Party Meeting 30th November 2015, and you exhibit it. Regarding the fire at Adair Tower, it stated, this could have been a very serious incident, but for the response of the emergency services who were able to treat neighbours suffering from smoke inhalation promptly. Many housing department and TMO staff, as well as our emergency officer, came in to help tenants over the weekend and acted very efficiently to ensure that none of the 12 households were without accommodation that night. I've written to thank them all. Now, the fire at Adair Tower happened on the 31st of October 2015, so this email was about a month later. Was this the first time that you'd heard of the Adair Tower, or had you heard the fire, or had you heard about it earlier?
I'm pretty sure I had heard about it earlier, but I think when I was writing my statement, this was the first documentary proof that I could find.
Yes, I see. When you found out about the fire at the end of October 2015, do you remember what action you took to obtain further details about its causes?
I don't remember precisely. I think I remember being told that they thought it was arson.
Who did you speak to? Do you remember?
It would have been Laura Johnson.
Laura Johnson, right. Let's go to RBK 403761, please. This takes us a little bit later into 2015, and this is the minute for the Housing Policy Board of the 3rd of December 2015, which you produce as RFM3. And if we go, as you can see from the first page, to the list, you're at ND, and the officers there are listed, but Laura Johnson. And Barbara Matthews is also there, as you can see. And then if you go to page 2, please, you can see that under any other business, Adair Tower, Laura Johnson reported that the London Fire Brigade have informed the council that they will be serving 2 enforcement notices on Hazelwood Tower and Adair Tower following the fire on 31st of October. Did you understand at the time what an LFB enforcement notice was?
I didn't have a kind of detailed understanding. I assumed that it meant that the LFB thought there were problems in the tower, that they were putting the TMO and the council on notice needed to be rectified, and if it wasn't rectified, they would take enforcement action.
Were you concerned by the fact that the LFB was serving an enforcement notice on the TMO?
Yes, I would have been.
Did you ask the Housing Department whether all other buildings in RBKC housing stock were compliant with relevant fire safety legislation?
I cannot remember whether I did or not.
It's rather a broad question. What really lies behind it is, did you explore with the Housing Department whether this was indicative of a more general problem or whether Adair Tower was a one-off?
I'm afraid I cannot remember the detail of conversations. I may have done. I was certainly given the impression, I was under the understanding that these were particular problems to these 2 towers, which were, they were what they called sister towers. They were designed to the same specification.
Did you ask how come an enforcement notice had been served when you had a fire risk assessor and presumably a fire risk assessment for that building?
I don't remember asking that question.
Why was that a question that, or can you explain why that was a question which didn't occur to you at the time?
No.
You say in your first witness statement at paragraph 35, there's no need to go back to it, at page 8 and over to page 9, that it was the responsibility of the TMO, not the council, to take action in relation to enforcement notices. Did you yourself ever follow up with the TMO to ensure that the relevant action was taken?
No, I would have expected the Housing Department to do that and update me, which I think they did.
Right. I see. Now, the minutes refer in the 3rd paragraph to the fact that the London Fire Brigade were looking at the ventilation system in the whole of Adair Tower, with the possibility that this will have to be entirely replaced. And the policy board noted the potential cost. Did that prompt any concern on your part about the ventilation systems in other RBKC housing stock, and particularly high-rises?
No. Again, I thought these were problems specific to the design and construction of Adair and Hazelwood Towers.
What gave you that impression?
Because there were enforcement notices about those 2 towers.
No, but what gave you the impression that the problems about?
Well, I thought I assumed, and I think it's probably correct, that the different towers all had different designs and different types of construction and different types of ventilation systems. So the fact that there was a particular problem in Adair and Hazelwood, to my mind, did not necessarily mean there would be the same problem in other differently designed and differently constructed blocks.
Now, the minutes go on to say at the end of that section, Councillor Feilding-Mellen will go and visit Adair Tower if possible before the end of next week or at the beginning of the new year. Did you? Did you visit Adair Tower? Do you remember?
I certainly went. I'm familiar with Adair Tower and Hazelwood Tower. I didn't go inside the tower, but I have visited the outside of the tower.
What did you learn from that about the fire?
I don't remember.
Right. Why didn't you go into the tower?
I don't remember.
Okay. Now, if we go to TMO 100159334, please, and I'll just cover this document, Mr. Chairman, if I may, before the break. You can see that this is a minute of the TMO executive team meeting on the 7th of July 2016. Now, of course, you're not present, naturally. You can see who was. If we go to item 3, on page 2, please. Adair Tower is the item, and it says this: Barbara noted that Janice, that's Janice Ray, received a phone call from Ben, I think that's Ben Dewis of the LFB, to say that we would be receiving a statutory information request asking for a list of residents and their contact details of residents that were living at Adair Tower on the 3rd, 4th and 5th floors on 31st October 2015. Barbara noted that we were surprised to have received this, as we have fully cooperated and kept nothing hidden from the fire brigade during their investigation. And then it says this: Robert has spoken to Laura and Rock, and their view is that we need to pass this to legal. Robert asked Barbara to speak to Laura and update her. Does the Rock here refer to you?
I presume so.
Yes. Do you recall having a conversation with Robert Black about the enforcement notices in respect of Adair Tower?
I don't have a clear recollection of that, but that's not to say that he didn't.
So you just can't remember one way or the other?
I'm afraid I can't remember what this would have been. I don't remember.
No. We haven't been able to find a minute or a written record of the meeting that's referred to here. I know you can't recall one way or the other, but could you explain why there is no written record of it?
Well, I can't, because it normally would have been at one of my housing policy boards that he would have come.
Did you habitually, or perhaps ever, speak to Robert Black about housing matters and not have it minuted or recorded in some way?
Certainly not habitually. There were a couple of occasions I can remember when we went, for example, I remember going and having a coffee. There was a new, under the Trellick Tower, there was a new kind of furniture social enterprise with a cafe. So there were maybe 2 or 3 occasions when I had an informal discussion with Robert, but I don't think we would ever have discussed something like this in one of those.
Right. Well, the note certainly records this fact of a conversation. Assuming, because you can't remember one way or the other, assuming that the minute here is correct and accurately records the event, are you able to explain why you were involved in conversations with Robert Black and Laura Johnson about the notices and what to do about enforcement?
I think it would have been Laura and Robert Black wanting to make sure that I, as the cabinet member, am informed as to what's happening.
It says that it says their view, which includes you, is that we need to pass this to legal.
I can't remember what was being passed to legal and why it would have been passed to legal. I don't know.
But would it have been part of your function at the time to have advised Robert Black together with, or perhaps without, Laura Johnson, to pass this question to legal?
Certainly, I wouldn't have done that without Laura Johnson. If this did happen, I would have imagined it to have been, as I say, at a Housing and Policy Board where he would have raised it. I would have been there with Laura Johnson, and I might have shared her view based on her advice that it should be passed to legal. But I can't remember that.
Very well. Mr. Chairman, we've got one more document on this line of examination.
Well, do you want to put it now?
Yes, why not, if that's all right. Can we just look at your first statement, please, first of all? I said one. I'm so sorry. I think there are probably two. But never mind. We can take them quickly. If you go to your first statement at page 9, paragraph 36, please, you can see that you say there that Laura Johnson told you about the Trellick Tower fire on the 20th of April 2017 by email. And if we look at that email, it's at RBK 403412 at the foot of page 1. Where she says, dear, well, doesn't she? She doesn't say dear. She says, Councillor FM, there was a fire last night at Trellick Tower. Below is an explanation of what happened in the current situation. And you responded to her email just above that by saying, on the 20th of April, thank you for letting me know. Fortunately, it sounds as though nobody was badly hurt. I guess we don't yet know the cause of the fire, ? And has this incident given any cause to worry about the safety of the building or the procedures in place when a fire breaks out? Or has the incident provided good reassurance that correct procedures and safety mechanisms are in place? Please keep me posted as you find out more. And she responds the same day, attaching a response that the TMO had produced for her, which is, in fact, at RBK 50943. If we can just look at that. And this is a schematic document which sets out a list of questions about Trellick Tower, including water pressure. Ignore the highlights on page 1. If we go to page 2, you can see that there's reference to, under paragraph 16, what is the drill in an emergency? Is there one? There's no drill as there's a stay-put strategy. If LFB assessment on arrival requires any evacuation, they will instigate this. There are other topics in there as well. Did you look at this document at the time? Do you remember?
I don't specifically remember, but I imagine I would have.
Right. Did you follow up with Laura Johnson about the fire before reading her report to the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee on it?
I cannot remember now without being able to go back and look at my documents, but I seem to remember I do remember there being a few back and forwards, and on the whole, again, it was reassuring, the information that I was given.
Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment now?
Yes, I think it is. Good. Thank you. We'll have a break now, Mr. Feilding-Mellen. We'll come back, please, at 20 to 12. And then, and please don't talk to anyone about your evidence over the break. All right. Thank you. Thank you. 20 to 12, then, please. Yes, would you ask Mr. Feilding-Mellen to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Feilding-Mellen, ready to carry on?
I am.
Good, thank you very much.
Yes, Mr.
You're
Chairman.
ready, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Feilding-Mellen, I'd like to ask you now about aspects of communications with residents of Grenfell Tower, if I may. And I'm going to start, if I can, with the petition that you may recall having been presented to the HPSC in December 2015. And you cover this in your first witness statement at paragraphs 84 to 85 of page 24. And if we can go to 85, please, on page 24. You say there, once Ryden commenced work on site, this is paragraph 85, I became aware of various complaints about the management of the project as well as about the behaviour and attitude of both Ryden and the TMO. I noted that the TMO was responding to these complaints. For example, in July 2015, there was an email exchange between Councillor Blakeman and Peter Maddison, and you exhibit that, in which he responded to the concerns that had been expressed. Nevertheless, the complaints continued, and on 2nd December 2015, there was a motion about the Grenfell Tower debated at full council, and then a petition signed by 60 people was handed in by Councillor Blakeman requesting that the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee undertake an urgent review of the TMO and Ryden's management of the refurbishment project. That's what you say. You say particularly that you'd noted that the TMO was responding to complaints. Were you surprised when the petition was presented?
I wouldn't describe my reaction as surprised.
You weren't surprised. So is this something that you saw coming?
Again, surprised is too strong. I wasn't necessarily expecting it, but petitions were, I mean, this wasn't the first petition that had been handed in about Grenfell project. I knew there were ongoing issues, which is why it had been debated at full council.
Did you realise, or did you see that the petitioners were claiming that their concerns, their day-to-day concerns, had been belittled and sidelined? Did you notice that?
I read the prayer of the petition.
You read
yes.
the prayer. Were you surprised? Well, let me ask you, what was your reaction to reading the prayer?
I might need to see the prayer.
Well, all right. You can do that if you need to. You don't have a. Do I take it from that you don't have an independent recollection of it?
I don't remember the exact details of what the prayer said in full. I remember the general themes, and I remember it being discussed, and I remember the email.
Right. Well, we can look at the prayer in a moment. But do you remember whether you had a particular view about whether it was necessary to have a review of the refurbishment project?
A review about what aspects?
Well, I'm asking you, did you think a review of the project was necessary? That was the subject matter of the petition.
So the petition, as far as I recall, was submitted to the Scrutiny Committee, asking the Scrutiny Committee to take a look. And I remember replying saying, I will need to defer to the chairman of the Scrutiny Committee to decide how he and his committee want to react. I then went away. I wasn't there at the Scrutiny Committee meeting, but I remember being told or seeing that the upshot was that the TMO board was going to do a review, and indeed I think it was agreed that the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee would go on to do a review about lessons learned in the future.
Right. You thought it was agreed that the HPSC, the Scrutiny Committee, would do a review?
At some, again, maybe my timing. I know that at some stage it was agreed at the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee that after their current working groups had done the current list of projects they were working on, they would undertake a review to try and learn lessons for future refurbishment projects.
Right. Well, let's see how this panned out. Can we please go to RBK 403567? This is an email. It's an email chain which starts. If we can go to that, please, on the bottom of page 1 and over to page 2. Very bottom of page 1, you can see it's an email of the 7th of December from Laura Johnson to you and Councillor Marshall. And at the top of page 2, she says this: a petition was handed into Council on Tuesday night by Councillor Blakeman, although the prayer and petition organisation has clearly been organised by Eddie Defan. If you would like to discuss with Robert Black or Peter Madison what they've done with regard to communicating with residents, Councillor Blakeman, Eddie, and how they think Ryden have performed, I'm sure they would be only too happy to discuss this with you. I think it's fair to say Peter is exhausted from the amount of time / responses Eddie and Councillor Blakeman have taken on this project. The TMO will, of course, be happy to assist in whatever way they can, but I don't think either myself or Robert have the resources to undertake a full-scale review with interviews of residents to meet the demands of the petitioners. I would like your guidance on how you wish to respond to the petition. And then you can see in the email that she copies the prayer from the petition in the italics. And she says, it says this: we, the undersigned residents of Grenfell Tower, ask the chairman of the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee to undertake an urgent scrutiny of the TMO and Ryden's management of the refurbishment project currently underway at Grenfell Tower. Time and again, residents' views have been ignored or downplayed. Despite interventions from our MP, Victoria Borwick, and our ward councillors, our day-to-day concerns are belittled and sidelined. While we recognise that once completed, the tower will, at long last, be fit for the 21st century, during this process we have had to endure living conditions that at times have been intolerable. We understand that the Council will be commencing a major programme of regeneration throughout the borough, and that this may involve refurbishment rather than demolition of some other tower blocks. In view of this, it is vital that all the lessons from the Grenfell Tower project are learned, so that the terrible daily living conditions inflicted upon us for so long are not replicated elsewhere. As part of this investigation, the residents of Grenfell Tower ask that their views and experiences be canvassed and included in the scrutiny report.
Would you like me to?
Well, hang on. So my first question, going back to it, because you wanted to see the prayer of the petition, is what was your reaction to the claim here that the residents' day-to-day concerns had been belittled and sidelined? That
didn't strike me as a fair representation of how either the TMO or the council had responded to concerns. From what I had seen, both the TMO and the council took account of and responded to and tried to reassure residents about the various different concerns and issues that were raised from when I became cabinet member in May 2013 through to this. And I've given many of those examples in my written statement. As you've already seen, I and the leader had met with residents about their concerns. I'd responded to emails. Laura Johnson had responded to emails. The TMO had responded to emails. So I did not feel that their views were being ignored or belittled or sidelined.
You then respond to her on page 1 the next day, 8th December, and it's an email you sent at 16:10, and it says this: Dear Miss Johnson, as the petition is addressed to the chair of HPSC, I must defer to Councillor Marshall. However, I would agree with you that both the Housing Department and the TMO must be mindful of their limited manpower and resources and must make sure that they spread such limited resources as evenly and fairly across the Council's entire HRA estate, rather than focusing predominantly wherever the loudest complaints are coming from. The Council has acknowledged the disruption and inconvenience caused by such major refurbishment and improvement works being done to Grenfell Tower, but I believe that that is the inevitable price that must be paid by the residents in order to have their flats brought up to the very good modern standards. I trust that both the TMO and Ryden will continue to work with residents of GT on a case-by-case basis, helping to fix individual problems that have resulted from the refurbishment, as the Council committed to in the amended motion last week. Is it fair to say that Laura Johnson was not in favour of a review by the Council?
I think what she says is that she wanted members to be mindful of her and the TMO's limited resources, which, as I paraphrase in this email, need to be used to look after all 9,500 properties across the HRA estate. We've gone into some detail yesterday about the financial and statutory constraints faced by the HRA. Indeed, I saw the end of Amanda Johnson's evidence where she highlighted some of the challenges that all councils had to deal with relating to policies and edicts that had come down from different central governments. And those were real difficulties and challenges. And she was just wanting to make sure that members understood those limitations. So I think she was, as she says, it would be difficult for her to do I can't remember how she phrases it, but a full kind of detailed questionnaire survey door-to-door with her resources. But she's willing to do a review as, I can't remember how she phrases it, but it's there.
Do I take it from this email back to her that you yourself were not in favour of the kind of review that the residents were seeking?
I wouldn't say that's what I was saying. No. I was deferring to Councillor Marshall. I wanted to let him guide, but I was aware and I understood Miss Johnson's concerns about the limited resources and the need to make sure that they were spent fairly across all 9,500 homes.
Would it be fair to characterise your response to her as essentially one of taking her side, agreeing with her, about whether or not the review that had been sought by the residents should be undertaken?
I don't think so. I'm saying I understand her concern. I also leave it specifically to the person to whom the petition is addressed to come to his own decision about this. And I go on to say that, I understand the inconvenience and disruption that's being caused. The council has acknowledged that. It was not easy for residents to have to live through that. We totally sympathise with that. And I go on to say that I trust the TMO and Ryden will continue to work with residents to solve their problems on a case-by-case basis.
Yes, Mr. Feilding-Mellen, we can read the text of both emails. I'm just seeking really to accept the fact that in this email, although you had deferred to Councillor Marshall, you thought fit to express your own views about it, and those were largely in line with what Ms. Johnson had stated. Isn't that what was happening?
I've told you that I certainly did understand and sympathise with her concern about limited resources.
Well, you're certainly not saying you think it's a jolly good idea that there should be a full learning review undertaken independently and impartially by somebody in respect of the Grenfell Tower refurbishment so that full lessons can be learned for the future. Well, you're not saying that, are you?
I don't specifically say that, but actually later on, I make a point of saying in meetings with David Collins and afterwards about the importance of learning lessons. I did think that was very important. I agreed with that part of the petition. I never said that was not important.
So let's see how this then plays out next. If we look at Councillor Marshall's response to you in the same email chain, he says, halfway down your screen, same day, my instinct was to add an oral agenda item to our next meeting rather than a report. What do you both think? I'm sure a majority of members could be pre-briefed to understand how to play it. Now, he's suggesting, as you can see there, an oral item rather than a report. Do you know why that was?
I think that he considered that would give the residents who signed the petition the chance to come and have their say at the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee, make sure that their views were not ignored or belittled or sidelined. They were going to be given the chance to speak directly to the Scrutiny Committee, make their case. But an oral agenda item would be one which perhaps required less manpower from housing officers. So it's a kind of compromise between the full-on detailed review and Ms. Johnson's explanation that there is limited resource available.
Well, no, with great respect. This is about why the next meeting should have this issue as an oral agenda item rather than a report. So why was that? What was so manpower intensive about producing a report?
In my understanding of what he meant, and you'd have to ask him, but I think there was a report, there was a written report at the Scrutiny Committee about it. So it wasn't about that. It was about being able to give the petitioners the chance to have a discussion at the Scrutiny Committee rather than going away and commissioning. Again, I can't remember how it's described in the prayer, but this,
Oh, I see. So you read this, did you, as Councillor Marshall suggesting that, is this right, that the petitioners should be able to address the HPSC under an oral agenda item rather than their producing it?
That's my interpretation, because that's what happened.
Right. When he says, I'm sure a majority of members could be pre-briefed to understand how to play it, what did you think he meant by that?
I can't be sure, but I now would think that he is trying to reassure Laura Johnson that he would pre-brief the Scrutiny Committee members about her concerns about doing the limitations and resource manpower limitations in terms of doing the full range of interviews, etc., that was asked for in the petition.
Right. And what would this sort of pre-briefing to understand how to play it involve?
I don't know. I wasn't on the committee, so it wouldn't have been.
No, I mean, reading it at face value, it looks like what's being suggested by Mr. Marshall, and obviously he'll have to answer for this, but it is some sort of quiet on-the-side discussion to tap people up, to influence them as to how to decide what to do with the petition. Now, you read this email.
Pre-briefing,
is that how you understood it?
Pre-briefing to me would be more making sure that all members of the committee, or the majority members of the committee, had a full understanding of what has been done to date. It's a briefing rather than.
Well, not really.
Well, he can.
It says to understand how to play it, to pre-briefed to understand how to play it. Not pre-brief so they know the facts, but pre-brief so they understand how to play it. Isn't that really an indication of really sort of helping people along to make the right decision?
You'll need to ask him that.
What was your understanding?
I've told you.
Okay. And then if we look at the next two emails in the chain, you say, I won't be there, see my early email. Can you speak to majority members beforehand? Speak to them about what?
Well, what he's just saying, I'm sure they could be pre-briefed. I'm saying I'm not going to be there. So if that's what you want to do, you'd best do it.
Yes. Can you speak to majority members beforehand to do what? What did you want, what did you want, Councillor Marshall?
Well, he is suggesting that they be pre-briefed to understand how to play it. I'm saying I won't be there. So effectively, if that's what you want to do, you will need to do it.
Yes, Mr. Feilding-Mellen, I'm going to ask the question. You see, I've asked you already about his sentence. You then come back and say, can you speak to majority members beforehand? Is that a response to his suggestion that a majority of members could be pre-briefed to understand how to play it?
Yes.
Yes. And his response was yes, ... Were you suggesting that Councillor Marshall speak to a majority of Conservative Party members?
Yes, that's what. But again, it wasn't me. He suggested it first.
Do you know whether he actually did speak to the majority?
I do not know.
Let's then go to TMO 1001 3234, please. Now, this is an email chain from the 11th of May 2016. So this is 5 months into 2016, after the Scrutiny Committee meeting, Mr. Feilding-Mellen, and after the review. It's the day on which the outcome of the board review was presented to the HPSC. And you can see the email from Robert Black to you and Councillor Marshall, copy to Laura Johnson, subject re-scrutiny meeting this evening, and there's an attachment. It says, "Dear councillors, thank you for sharing this. I've spoken to our company secretary, and she's spoken to our BKC Governance Services, and we are advised of the following." And then you refer in the second and third paragraphs to a conflict around Councillor Blakeman. You see that?
I didn't refer to it. The email refers to it.
Yes. Now, this is an email response to an email which had come a little bit earlier. If you go to page 2, which comes from you to Councillor Marshall, and you say this: "Dear Quentin, I think HPSC needs Judith to be clear about her role as a board member of the TMO, and she needs to be guided about whether that is an interest to be declared. And what is the most appropriate forum for her to make some of these points within the TMO or at HPSC? I've also copied in officers so they can get early sight of the issues raised below so that they can respond in case you're minded to discuss all these issues tonight." As I've shown you, Robert Black responds to that at page 1.
What was the email below? Can I see?
Yes, of course. Of course you can, absolutely. Page 3. We can look at page 3. We can go to the bottom of the email chain. We can scroll slowly through it if you like. If we go to the very bottom at page 5, we can see, page 3, we can see a long email, which is advance comments about the report. You see that? And we scroll slowly down through page 4, which is a series of comments on...
These are from Judith Blakeman, aren't they?
These are from Judith Blakeman, and I'll show you the signature.
Mm-hmm.
At the bottom of page... sorry, it's a very tricky email to understand. It appears to be a forwarded message, and it ends on page 6. And it starts, "Dear Quentin, to save time this evening, see some advanced comments below, Judith," and then there's a lot of comments. I'm not going to get into the detail of that, and we could spend a very long time doing that, and I'm not sure our next witness would appreciate it. But then, if we look at page 2, this is what you're referring to, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And then at page 1, we've had the response from Robert Black. I've shown you the same day.
Mm-hmm.
And he's raised, as I say, some clear concerns about Judith Blakeman's role. Now, we can look at that. It's a lengthy document, but he's raised questions about conflicts of interest around Councillor Blakeman. You weren't a member of the HPSC at this stage, but we've seen that you are the one who raises questions about her role as a board member, which I've shown you. Why were you raising those concerns about Judith Blakeman's potential for conflict of interest?
So, from memory, I do think that it had been flagged to me by Laura Johnson that there were potential risks around Councillor Blakeman being, well, potentially conflicted. And so I would have asked about that.
Could you explain the nature of the potential conflict which Laura Johnson had flagged to you?
So I do remember it was something which councillors, when we were appointed to outside bodies. So a member of another trust or organisation like the TMO, we were told that one normally had, statutory duties as a trustee or a director there, and one had to be careful and mindful about when one's fulfilling that statutory responsibility and when one's acting as a councillor. And I think that had been flagged to me, and so I was in turn flagging it on.
Let me see if I can get to the bottom of this more simply. Was the conflict, as you understood it, being flagged to you?
I don't think I say there is a conflict. I ask whether there might be, I think.
All right, you're quite right. It was the potential for conflict that had been flagged to you, one between Judith Blakeman's role as councillor and her role as nominated member of the TMO board. Was that the nature of
my understanding was the potential conflict between her role, yes, as a councillor and a member of the Housing Property Scrutiny Committee, and her role as a board member. I wouldn't say it mattered whether she was, just because she... my understanding is that it's her statutory duties as a board member, not just because she was a board member nominated by RBKC.
Those roles that she had, those three roles, in fact, were roles that she'd had for a very long time, weren't they?
She was certainly a councillor for a long time. I can't remember when she was first made a board member of the TMO.
Can you explain why this issue was being raised with you and you are raising it with Councillor Marshall?
I think probably...
Hold on, sorry, there's a question coming.
You
don't have to finish it. That's the way this works. Could you please explain why this question was only, or this potential for conflict was only being flagged now, when Councillor Blakeman is coming in with her comments on the board report about the Grenfell Tower project, and not at any earlier time?
I think for the reason the kind of answer is in your question, which is it's discussing the board report. She was a member of the board. It's a report going out in the name of the TMO board, of which she was a member. I think that's why there was a specific concern.
Did you understand that TMO board members who sat on the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee were not expected to participate in discussions about the TMO?
That was not my expectation. Indeed, I didn't know exactly how... It might have been fine that she just needed to declare the interest. I was asking questions. I didn't want it to cause problems later on when it had been flagged to me. So I thought better to raise it as a potential concern beforehand.
Was the purpose of this to identify potential conflict, so in some way either to silence or negate Judith Blakeman's contribution to the board report?
Absolutely not.
Right. Let's go to RBK 3032130. This is the minutes of the HPSC meeting on the 6th of January 2016, scrolling back to earlier in the year. And you may remember that meeting.
I wasn't there, but I've heard about it and read about it.
Yes. And you exhibit this minute at RFM 51. And you can see who was there and who wasn't there. You can see that in the list of councillors, Quentin Marshall was there, Sam McIver was there, Judith Blakeman was there, and there's a long list of others in attendance. You are not there. If you go to page 5, please, you can see the conclusion. Do I take it that from what you've just said that you would have seen the minute soon after the meeting, or soon after the minute was finalised?
I think I would have seen the minute when it was circulated with the papers for the next HPSC meeting.
Right. And do you remember? Well, let's look at what I want to show you first. If you go to page 5, last paragraph above A5, it says, in conclusion, the chairman agreed that a working group would be commissioned at some point in the future, but that this was dependent on a number of factors, including the conclusion of existing working groups and the review work conducted by the TMO. When you saw this minute at the next HPSC meeting, did you read that paragraph? Do you remember? I
don't remember, but I'm familiar with it now, and that's what I was talking about earlier on in my evidence.
Yes. Do you remember agreeing at the time, at least in your own mind, with the conclusion reached by the committee as expressed by the chairman in that paragraph?
that they would. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't my decision, but I thought it sounded like a sensible conclusion.
Right. Do you know then, having seen the decision, when it would be that the working group would be established, if at all?
Sorry, is your question, did I know then exactly how long in the future it would be before it was established, or are you asking me whether I know now when it was established?
No. My question was, did you know then, having seen the decision at the next meeting, you saw the decision and it recorded, what your understanding was about the time frame when this working group would be established?
My understanding was that it would be subject to the conclusion of the existing working groups.
And when would that be?
I wasn't sure.
So did you have any idea about when this working group would be set up, even vaguely?
It would have been, I would have expected to be months rather than years. And this was, my understanding was this is a working group looking at what lessons could be learned for future refurbishment projects of a similar nature and scale. And there were not imminent such projects in the pipeline, so I was fairly relaxed that there was good time for that to be done.
Now, we do know that in due course the TMO board did produce its own review report, and you exhibit that final document as RFM 52. It's at RBK 403513. This is the final version. And it's dated the 31st of March. Did you see this document at the time, do you think? Or do you think, but this is the board report, or do you think you saw the report produced by Laura Johnson for the HPSC later in the year, in May?
I can't remember exactly. I think I have seen the TMO board report itself.
Right.
But I can't remember exactly when it was sent to me.
Right. Let's see if I can help you a bit better. Can we have both up at the same time, please? Keep this document on the screen, and let's have up at the same time RBK 3032438. You can see that the left-hand document is the actual board review report itself, 31st March 2016. And on the right of the screen is the document Laura Johnson produced for the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee, dated the 11th of May 2016.
Right.
And the former purpose is to provide the board with information and recommendations. And on the right-hand side, it's to provide the Housing, Property and Scrutiny Committee with information and recommendations. Do you see? And just of those two, do you remember seeing the one on the left, the March 2016 report?
I'm afraid right now they look so similar, I can't be sure. If I have submitted the one on the left in my evidence, then that means I would have seen it. But right now, I'm afraid I can't be certain.
Right. If we look down at the one on the left, I think we'll probably look at first. If we can go to scroll down, I think is probably the best way to deal with that. Scroll down through it. You can see what's covered. On page 2 is the background to the report. If we go to page 3, you can see the topics. Item 3, resident consultation. Item 4, position of the HIU in the hallway. Item 5, allegations of threats, lies and intimidation. 6 is response to complaints. 7, quality of work and site management. 8 is compensation. And 9 are conclusions. You see that? And if we go and do the same with the right-hand side document, please start on page 1, scroll down. You can see, if you go to the next, it's similar, in fact, almost identical. And again, you get recommendations under paragraph 2 and conclusions under paragraph 3, where you can see group recognised that there were significant challenges with the project and acknowledged that residents would have experienced inconvenience due to the nature of this type of construction work and the constraints of the particular design of Grenfell Tower. Disruption included, lots of bullet points there. Paragraph 3.4 is a door-knocking exercise, etc. Just looking at paragraph 3, over on page 3 and over on page 4, do you remember seeing those conclusions?
Are you talking about the one on the right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Were you content with the outcome of the review?
Yes.
Were you concerned that the review lacked independence in light of the fact that it was conducted by the TMO board?
Well, no, I thought that I think I touched on this yesterday, but my view was that the TMO board was an independent entity with a majority of resident and leaseholders on it. Their whole purpose, the reason that the TMO was set up under the right to manage, was to ensure responsive management of the housing stock for and led by the residents of the council housing stock. Within the board, not only were there a majority of tenants and leaseholders, there were also a number of independent board members. And my understanding is that the chairwoman of this group was one of those independent board members.
Was that Paula Fantz?
Yes. And I felt reassured that the board would take these issues seriously and look into them thoroughly. And the report that I read gave me that impression.
Yes. Just breaking that down a little bit, is it the case then on that answer that you thought that the TMO board was sufficiently independent and impartial a collection of people that it could examine objectively, robustly, and ruthlessly independently the activities of the employees of the TMO in relation to the Grenfell Tower project?
So I believed that the TMO board was set up to have a majority of members who are residents to make sure that it was responsive and cared about how the executive function of the TMO treated residents, because it was them. And I was also aware that over the last few years, the TMO had done a lot of work to try and strengthen the board, both in terms of elections for the board, reaching out, increasing the number of members, increasing how many people voted, who could stand, and training for board members. And I did feel reassured that the board would be a suitable body to conduct such a review.
Do you know what objective factors or criteria the TMO was measuring itself and Ryden against when producing this document, or either document?
I'm not sure. Can you give a bit more detail about what you're asking?
Let me start with the left-hand side document. In fact, don't worry about the about the Laura Johnson report. When the board produced its report and its conclusions and recommendations about the Grenfell Tower project, do you know what objective factors or criteria the TMO board was using to measure its performance? When I say its, I mean the TMO's performance.
I need to, from memory, when you went through the different particular complaints, it tried looking at what evidence there was to back up those complaints. I think it spoke probably to there at the top, the group will advise different methods of quality control, site management by the surveyors, clerks of works, and site agent. When I read that report, I got the sense they went through each of the different complaints trying to understand the basis for those complaints, speaking to the people against whom the complaints were being made, and coming to a judgment,
Yes.
which was a group of independent board members who had a vested interest in making sure that the TMO was a responsive organisation to its residents, because that included them.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. My question was a slightly different one. Do you know what those individuals, the independent board members who had a vested interest in making sure that the TMO was responsive, etc., what standards, what objective criteria existing in the world were being applied by them in order to judge the performance of the TMO?
I don't, and I don't necessarily think they were judging. The point of this was to respond to particular complaints. It wasn't a performance review of the whole TMO. The point of this review was to review specific allegations and complaints that had been made about the management of the refurbishment project at Grenfell Tower.
Now, we've got no evidence, at least we've seen no evidence, and maybe you can correct me about this, I don't know, that the residents of Grenfell Tower were interviewed as part of this review or had any say in what information the review should have in front of it. We've seen no evidence to that effect. Are you able to help us with that?
I seem to remember being informed that the TMO did do a door-knocking exercise after the petition was lodged. I seem to remember over the kind of Christmas period, unless my memory might be failing me, but I seem to remember them knocking on something like 72 or 77, speaking to that many, and, for example, finding no evidence of any bullying and harassment. That's what I remember, but I was reading from this. So
yes,
if I haven't seen the actual video footage of them doing this door-to-door knocking or any evidence like that.
So your answer to my question is the door-knocking exercise that you seem to recall. Did you, at the time, do you remember, did you think that the door-knocking exercise conducted in respect of the residents was an adequate way of understanding residents' concerns to be as the subject of the review exercise?
Wasn't that one of the requests in the petition prayer?
Well, just answer my question, please. Did you think that the door-knocking exercise was the right way of going about understanding the residents' concerns, which was part of
At the time, I didn't see any reason to doubt why that would not be an effective way of doing that.
Now, if we stay with the right-hand side, please, and go to page 3, you can see that there are a number of recommendations made at paragraph 2. Just scan your eye down those 5 bullet points there. Do you know if any changes were made to RBKC policy and procedure as a result?
My understanding is that these recommendations were for TMO policy and procedures, weren't they?
Were these recommendations carried into effect? Do you know?
So what I do remember is later on that year, when I agreed to have a meeting with Mr. Collins, and he wrote with a list of, I can't remember exactly how many, 15 or 16 suggestions. I asked for the TMO's feedback and Housing Department's feedback on those suggestions, and I do remember getting an email from Sasha Jevons in reply, and it seemed to me that an awful lot of those suggestions had been agreed and either had been implemented by the TMO or they'd agreed to implement them.
Yes, and let's look on a little bit. Before we do that, can we go to your first witness statement, please, at page 27, paragraph 94. You say there, in the third line from the end, eventually the TMO agreed that the report would be made public. And on 19th May 2016, I emailed some of the residents who had made the complaints, telling them that the report would be made available for them to review. And you exhibit it. The word eventually there, did you get the impression that the TMO were reluctant to publish the report?
Yes, so it wasn't just an impression. They expressed it clearly.
Oh, did they? Who expressed that?
I think Mr. Black did.
Well, do you know why?
From what I remember, he said that his board had asked for it to be kept confidential, and it was something which quite a few members of the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee thought was not right, and I shared that opinion.
Was there any other reason you were told or detected in Mr. Black wanting to keep the...
I didn't know why, and I didn't agree with it.
Now, let's look on in the year, September 2016. I think you've referred to this a moment ago. Let's see if we can be a bit more specific. RBK 3030865. If we go to page 2 in that email run, you can see that here is an email from David Collins of the 6th of September to you, copy to Judith Blakeman, and he says, "Dear Rock, I hope you've had a good summer and enjoyed time with your family. It was a pleasure to meet with Laura, Judith and yourself back in July. Thank you for taking the time to discuss the Grenfell Tower improvement works, the TMO and the role of the checks and balances in maintaining a transparent culture which represents both sides of the story. I'm very curious to know if anything's changed in your thinking or in the Council's approach to regeneration or the operations of the TMO as a result." And then you forward this, if you look up to the next page, please, page 1, you can see you forward this at the foot of the page to Laura Johnson on the 7th of September, the next day. And you say, "Please see below." And then over the page, at the top of the screen, you say, "Can you think of any small concession we can think of offering? Kind regards, RFM." And she replies about a month later, if you go back to page 1, please, on the 4th of October 2016, saying, "Councillor FM, I'm struggling to think of something, hence the time it's taken for me to respond, and because I actually think the TMO managed this pretty well in difficult circumstances." And then she says this, "I suppose we could say something to the effect that on larger programmes such as these will complement estate regeneration, as there will be greater council officer and member involvement, more focused working on assessing the needs of individual tenants, and perhaps going into greater detail with residents about what the costs are and why the budget will only stretch so far in the context of what we can spend across the stock on capital works. Now there is a greater use of digital media. We may, for some age groups, focus some of our efforts at making information more accessible online, whilst respecting the fact that for some, they still prefer face-to-face communication. Is that enough along the right lines? Question mark. Regards, LJ." And you respond at the top of the page, "Yes, something along those lines would be good. And can we confirm that any of the recommendations he sent over will be implemented? Weren't quite a few of them being done or going to be done anyway? Many thanks, RFM." So that's the line of emails. To your knowledge, well, let me ask you, did you get a response from Laura Johnson in answer to your questions there?
I don't remember getting one.
Did you chase for any?
I don't remember chasing Laura Johnson about it. I do remember that I think later that year, or early in 2017, when the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee had set up a subgroup looking at the lessons learned, and were looking at the Trellick Tower works that were to be done, I do remember forwarding Mr. Collins' email with his various suggestions to Peter Madison, asking him directly whether these lessons have been learned, and trying to get reassurance that the TMO was implementing the changes that Sasha Jevons had told me would be done.
Right. I see. Going back to your question at the top of page 2 in this email run, you ask her, "Can you think of any small concession?" Can we just go back to page 2, the top? "Can you think of any small concession that we can think of offering?" What did you mean by small concession?
I think I meant that, given, as I say, higher up the page, my understanding was there was actually not very big gap between what Mr. Collins was suggesting, recommending, and what I was being told the TMO were either already doing or were planning to do. there was only a small gap and therefore only potentially a small concession needed to resolve any remaining disagreement.
Right. Why did you want the concession to be small?
I didn't say I want it to be small. I thought it was only necessary for there to be a small concession because, as I say, the gap between what I'd been told was happening and what he was asking was small.
It doesn't really read that way, does it? I mean, it really reads along the lines of, can you think of something we can fob Mr. Collins off with?
I totally disagree with that. But you and I have read different things differently before. So.
Very well. Did you believe that there were no substantive learning points for RBKC from the refurbishment, or from the TMO, for the TMO from the refurbishment that you could tell Mr. Collins in answer to his question?
I think I had told Mr. Collins at our meeting because I'd had the email from Sasha Jevons, at which there were many of those things were being done, and I thought those were important lessons. And that's why I forwarded them on to Peter Madison in late 2016 or early 2017, saying, can you just confirm that these lessons have been learned before we embark on Trellick?
Right. Why didn't you answer? Let's go back to so you have it in front of you, Mr. Collins's question on page 2. I'm very curious to know if anything has changed in your thinking or in the Council's approach to regeneration or the operations of the TMO as a result. I mean, I'm assuming you understood his question.
Yes.
Yes. What was to stop you simply setting out the answers? If there were substantive answers to give him, why could you or perhaps Laura Johnson not simply respond to him and say, what's changed as follows?
My point is I don't think a huge amount had changed since the meeting, because at that meeting I had explained the responses that I had had from both the TMO board review and from Sasha Jevons specifically. And there wasn't a huge amount of change since that, because there was already, and I was asking Laura Johnson, is there something else on top of what we've already said, which Sasha Jevons has told us, and hence why it only needs to be small, because it seemed to me that there was an awful lot of agreement.
Right. Just help me. During this meeting, I mean, was this meeting minuted or noted at all that you'd had with Mr.
I don't think it was.
No. What did you... it says here in the email that you'd taken the time to discuss the works, the role of checks and balances, etc. At the end of that meeting, did you have the impression that Mr. Collins was satisfied?
I think the outstanding issue, as far as I remember, was he wanted a kind of some other form of independent check on the TMO, and it wasn't very clear to either Laura Johnson or myself exactly what or who that would be. So that was, I think, the main, from my recollection, the main kind of area of difference still.
Right. And why not then simply just go back to him and say, well, I'm afraid, Mr. Collins, nothing has changed. Our position remains as explained to you at our July meeting.
I asked Laura Johnson. She replied. I replied back to her, and I didn't get a response. I think I was expecting her to draft a response. I didn't get it, and I'm afraid it must have slipped my mind after that. But the issues of learning those lessons from Grenfell for future projects did not slip my mind, as is demonstrated by the email I sent to Peter Madison.
Let's look at one or two more documents. This is in relation to Trellick Tower, RBK 401807. This is an email exchange between you and Peter Madison starting in December 2016. And it concerns a request for further information in relation to Trellick Tower. And at the bottom of page 1, you say this: I'm particularly keen to make sure that we've learned all lessons from the Grenfell Tower project with regards to resident consultation and engagement. This means not only following best practice, but also foreseeing what those with political motivations will do and to try and stir up problems and trying to minimise such opportunities. Therefore, can you please send us a copy of the TMO Board's report and recommendations into the GT project so that we can cross-check that we are following all recommendations here? Indeed, it might also be worth reviewing again the long list of recommendations that was prepared by David Collins and Councillor Blakeman to check whether any of those issues may be pertinent to TT. Now, you referred earlier, I think, in your evidence to discussions in early 2017 with Peter Madison on Trellick Tower. But is this the email you were thinking?
Yes.
It is, right. If we just go back a page, could we go to the last paragraph, the part I read, which says, thank you, which says, foreseeing what those with political motivations will do to try and stir up problems. Who were you referring to there, do you think?
I'm pretty sure I was referring to the local Labour councillors.
The local Labour councillors?
In Goldbourne Ward, where Trellick Tower is.
I see. So,
It was
and what experiences were you drawing on from Grenfell Tower when you made that remark?
Well, I think I was talking more generally about the lessons learned about resident consultation and engagement from Grenfell Tower, but with regards to Trellick Tower, which was in Goldbourne Road, where there was a particular group of local Labour councillors, I think I was flagging that up as an extra. It was as a politician. I was thinking about that from a political point of view.
I see. Can we then look, please, at RBK 30's51312? This is a bundle of documents which, some 11 pages long, which is delivered to you, I think, on the 30th of May 2017. And it's signed, as you can see, by Lee Chapman and Tunde Awaderu as Secretary and Vice Chair of the Grenfell Tower Leaseholders Association. And it says, Dear Councillor Rock Feilding-Mellen, further to previous correspondences, please find attached relevant materials, including evidence of 96 signatures collected by the Grenfell Tower Leaseholders Association from the residents of Grenfell Tower. This excludes vacant properties and residents away on holiday. It is clear without a shadow of a doubt that the residents are calling for and demanding security and concierge in Grenfell Tower without further delay. Do you recall those documents being hand-delivered to the Town Hall for your attention at the end of May 2017?
Yes, and I remember one of the officers in the who looked after the cabinet compiling them and asking Laura Johnson to prepare a response.
I see. Do you remember that the petition was presented following correspondence with the GTLA about number of complaints, but primarily to the sighting of the gas pipes or gas risers in the stairway?
I remember that issue well, and I think I go into some detail about it in my witness statement.
Yes. Do you remember that this petition was presented following that?
Yes.
Yes. Did you read? Do you remember reading the documents enclosed with this bundle?
I have to say I can't remember going through all of them at the time. I can't remember if I did or didn't.
Do you remember what action you took in response to?
Well, I asked the officer who had collected them to pass them on to Laura Johnson so that the housing department could prepare a response.
Yes. What did you make of the fact that 96 signatures or so had been collected in relation to this building so soon after there had been a board review of the Grenfell Tower refurbishment?
Well, I think there were ongoing emails from Mr. Awaderu and others with various concerns, mainly about, as you've said, the gas pipe being put in by National Grid, which I shared their concern and asked for on numerous times reassurance that all would be safe and that it should be checked properly. I remember there were issues about the staircase being left undecorated. There were issues about noises banging in the night. And I remember following up with all of those things with Laura Johnson. Indeed, that's why she, I think, got the TMO to prepare a response on behalf of Councillor Blakeman, which went through many of those issues. And I wrote to both Laura Johnson and Robert Black saying I'm happy to meet with the residents if that's what they need. And I'm slightly surprised that after spending over £10 million on this tower, there are problems, and I'd like to understand what they are.
Did you get the sense that, notwithstanding the report that had been done by the review group at TMO, nonetheless that hadn't solved the problems or the way the residents felt within the tower?
Which, I mean, so for example, with the staircase, the TMO told them that they were going to paint the staircase. It had been put into the, with the national grid, there was ongoing concern, and I thought very fairly, and I was unhappy with the responses that I received about National Grid's reaction. I understood it was frustrating for the TMO because this was something which the National Grid were doing. This is what I was told by Laura Johnson, that they had their own statutory authorities to do this and were responsible for the work. And yet for residents, they kind of saw the TMO and indeed the council as responsible for that. So the TMO and the council were slightly caught in a difficult position with regards to those pipes. And that's why I, and indeed the leader, suggested that we write to our MP about it.
Mr. Chairman, I've come to the end of my prepared questions for Mr. Feilding-Mellen. I'm in your hands as to how we should proceed. We'll need the usual 15 or 20 minutes or so to ensure that we've covered everything with him and to see if there are any follow-up questions which are appropriate.
Yes. Well, first of all, we have to have a break at this point, Mr. Feilding-Mellen. You may know this, but when Council's reached the end of his prepared questions, he needs a chance to check that nothing's been left out. And we also need there to be an opportunity for others who are not present to suggest further questions. So we'll have a break now. Mr. Minnick, will 15 minutes be long enough, or?
It may be. Let's see.
Well, if I say that we'll come back at 1 o'clock.
That should be. Yes. If we need more time,
I can ask. You can tell us how long you think you might need for whatever questions there are.
Yes.
And if we can dispose of them fairly promptly, we can push the lunch hour back a bit.
Well, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Before.
Very good.
Right, thank you. I'm going to ask you to leave us now, please, Mr. Feilding-Mellen, and not to talk about your evidence while you're out of the room.
Okay.
Right, thank you very much. Right, Mr. Minnick, 1 o'clock.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, would you ask Mr. Feilding-Mellen to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Feilding-Mellen, we'll see if there are more questions for you. Mr. Millett?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there are one or two.
Before you start, do you think we can expect to finish them within 10 or 15 minutes?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Feilding-Mellen, first, can I ask you to look, please, at IWS 402334? And I'll just show you for page 1 of this. It's Mr. David Collins' statement to the inquiry of the 21st of September 2020. And what I'm going to show you relates to the July discussions that you had with him, which we saw recorded in his 6th of September 2016 email, which we discussed earlier on, the two of us, today. Can we go to page 29, please? And in that document, on that page, you can see that he deals with a meeting in July with you. And he says, after a to and fro by email, a meeting took place on the afternoon of 13th July 2016 at Hornton Street Town Hall. Apart from myself, no compact members were present. Laura Johnson and Councillor Judith Blakeman were in attendance. During the meeting, then he says, Councillor Feilding-Mellen suggests that he did not understand why residents were unhappy with the work carried out to improve Grenfell Tower. He said it was a more considerable investment than any part of the borough, etc. And if we can turn, please, specifically to page 31 in this list of things that he recalls. At N, he says, I asked if he would take forward the increasing of checks and balances on the TMO. He said he would take my thoughts into consideration. Do you remember that? Do you remember him asking you that question and you responding in that way?
I think this is what I was referring to earlier, where I said my recollection of the main kind of area where there was still disagreement between us. And when I say us, I mean him on the one side and myself and Laura Johnson on the other, was he was asking for, as I recall it, a not particularly clear or well-defined process of kind of additional independent checks of the TMO. And Laura Johnson, and I agreed with her, thought that the existing levels of checks, i.e. having a resident-controlled board and then having the Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee and indeed the checks of the Housing Department officers, as I understood it to be at the time, was satisfactory.
He then says at paragraph 136, I bumped into Councillor Feilding-Mellen in Bramley Road near the pedestrian crossing adjacent to Whitchurch Road during the month which followed. The outcome was clarity. He was not going to follow up on the matters raised through our prior conversation. Is that right? Is his recollection of that correct?
I think in terms of that particular point, I probably did tell him that the advice that I had been given and which I concurred with was that we thought the checks that were in place were satisfactory.
Thank you. Next follow-up question. You touched earlier on about on the subject of the composition of the TMO board. In 2016 or 2017, before the fire at any rate, do you remember whether any consideration was given to whether any residents of Grenfell Tower specifically or residents of the Lancaster West Estate more generally should be on the TMO board?
I don't remember. My understanding was that residents could stand for election to the TMO board by the members of the TMO, which were other residents. So my understanding was you couldn't really nominate residents from a particular block over any other particular block. It was they had to stand and be elected by the members of the TMO.
Yeah, I mean, as a fact, it's correct, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but that there were no residents of Grenfell Tower or the Lancaster West estate more generally on the TMO board before the fire?
I have to say, I did not know the addresses of the different residents who were on the TMO board. It was not something which I thought it was private information. I didn't ask that.
Do you know whether any consideration was given to inviting any particular resident of the Tower or the Lancaster West estate to stand for election to the TMO board?
My understanding is that the TMO had a general policy of trying to engage and encourage residents across the entire HRA stock to become active members and to stand for election to the board if they thought they could contribute. So I would be surprised if Lancaster West was somehow excluded from that process.
Now, we during the course of your evidence, you answered some questions about the cladding change from zinc to aluminium. That was one topic. And another topic was whether there were existing objective criteria that the board of the TMO should be applying when doing their review in the first part of 2016. Separate topics, but both give rise to a follow-up line. Can I ask you, please, to look at the MMA? Were you familiar with the terms of the MMA, the Modular Management Agreement?
I never read the MMA.
You never read the MMA. Did anybody ever provide you, ever, with a digest or summary of its terms?
So I signed a key decision, which was agreeing to an updated version of the MMA. I think it was in 2015. And that key decision report, which was prepared by Laura Johnson, set out the background and the explanation for the changes. And I remember it confirming that the MMA was considered fit for purpose and that the changes had been checked by both legal and by finance departments.
Right. Do you remember when in 2015? Was it December that year?
I do not remember exactly.
Right. Well, let's just look at one or two provisions in it. And this is particularly Schedule 3 to the MMA. Can we please go to RBK 3019006? And in that, please turn... this is Volume 1 of the Modular Management Agreement for the TMO, the MMA. And if we can turn, please, first to page 165 in that document, we can see there is something called Client Review Group, a third of the way down now in the middle of your screen. Paragraph 2.1, you see that it says, the neighbourhood manager and project manager will decide whether to establish a client review group or a steering group for the project. This will be chaired by a representative of the Residents Association and will include the neighbourhood manager and project manager. The role of this group will be to act as client for the project, review progress in implementing the scheme and focus on those issues which directly concern residents. Where it is decided not to establish a client review group, the Residents Association will be asked to nominate a representative to join the project team. If there is no residents' association, the project manager should advise the tenant participation group and agree how best to encourage resident involvement. Were you aware that that was a provision of the MMA?
Not specifically, no.
No. Do you know whether that provision was examined for the purposes or by the TMO board in carrying out its investigation into the TMO's conduct of the Grenfell Tower project?
I don't know exactly. I remember being told on numerous occasions, for example, in the cabinet reports, that the TMO had done quite extensive consultation, had agreed a process for ongoing engagement with the residents of the tower, and it then also set up a Grenfell Compact group, which I know it met with, and it had the resident liaison officer. And I think the board, from memory, reviewed the resident engagement process.
Yes. Let's try another provision of this. Can we skip forward 2 pages, please, to page 167 and look at paragraph 5.2? Under that, it says appointment of consultants. That's the heading. And under 5.2, it says the project manager, consultancy services manager, neighbourhood manager, and residents association representatives will select suitable consultants with relevant experience. The project manager will chair the panel. Depending on the size and complexity of the project, consultants may be appointed from a number of disciplines. And then you can see a list, and at the top of the list is architecture. Do you remember, well, first of all, were you familiar with that provision?
No, I hadn't read any of the MMA.
Do you know, from your knowledge, whether or not the TMO board examined this provision and investigated whether or not it had been complied with, particularly in respect of the appointment of Studio E as architects for the Grenfell Tower project?
I do not know whether the board reviewed this provision in that regard, and nor do I know to what extent the TMO did consult with residents in the appointment of the architect, because it was before I was the cabinet member for housing.
Looking at page 175, please, paragraph 15.3. This is at the top of the page, and in fact it starts at the foot of page 174 under site meetings. It's to do with site meetings, and it says this: to ensure that tenants' concerns are addressed, the Residents Association representative can either attend the site meeting or a meeting can be held with the Residents Association prior to the site meeting. Feedback will be provided to the residents after the site meeting where necessary. Again, I assume that because you hadn't read this detail of document, you weren't aware of that provision.
No.
No. And again, do you know what the TMO board did in the course of its review to ensure that the TMO had complied with this provision?
I do not know.
No. And then page 177, same questions, I'm afraid. 177, paragraph 22.1, post-project review. All schemes will be subject to a post-project review after completion of the project or on sectional completion. Residents will be asked for their views on the way the work was carried out and what they like or dislike about the improvements to their homes. The survey will also seek to collect BME data. And again, same questions. First, were you aware that this was an obligation contained in the MMA?
No.
And secondly, do you know what the TMO board did in its review to ensure that this obligation was complied with?
I don't know, but my understanding is the board review was completed before the end of March 2016, and I'm not sure that the project had finished then. I do seem to remember reading reports from the TMO that they were going to do a satisfaction survey after completion.
But you don't know whether one was actually ever carried out in conformity with the obligation contained here?
I cannot remember that now.
No. Thank you very much. Mr. Feilding-Mellen, I've got one question for you, and it's a question we don't ask every witness, but certainly of witnesses who have performed particular roles in relation to the Grenfell Tower project and other matters. And it's this: looking back on the evidence that you and I have covered together over what is now over a day, for which I'm grateful, is there anything you would have done differently?
That is a question which I'm sure you would have expected, and is the case I've asked myself constantly over the last 4 years. And I think I will probably be haunted by that question for the rest of my life. Based on the information I had, and given what I considered my roles to be, I really don't know what I could have done differently. But I wish from the very bottom of my heart that things had been done differently so as to have prevented that fire. And that includes anything that this inquiry decides that the council, the cabinet, or I should have done differently. And if I may, I'd like to say how I know that the sorrow and the pain that I have experienced over the last 4 years is nothing compared to what must be unbearable grief that those who lost their loved ones have had to suffer, and indeed all those who had their lives shattered on that night. And to those people, I want to say how very sorry I am.
Thank you very much, Mr. Feilding-Mellen. And it remains for me to thank you finally for your evidence to the inquiry in writing and over the last day or so. So thank you very much.
And Mr. Feilding-Mellen is absolutely right that I should thank you as well on behalf of all three members of the panel for coming to give your evidence. It has been very helpful to us to hear what you have to tell us, and we really are very grateful to you for giving up the time to come and speak to us like that. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope it's not remiss of me to say that I would like to thank you and your panel members and Mr. Millett and the whole inquiry team for the work that you have done and will continue to do to try and make sure this sort of thing can't happen again. So thank you.
thank you. Yes, if you go to the usher, she'll look after you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Millett. So we're obviously going to break at that point, so we have some lunch. We'll resume at 2:15 when
Very good.
I think there's another witness to come.
There is Mr. Nicholas Paget-Brown.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
2:15 then, please.